Okay, so here's the thing nobody saw coming. We've been burned before. We sat through Tom Cruise running through the streets of London in that 2017 reboot that nobody asked for, watched the so-called Dark Universe collapse before it even got off the ground, and for years, we just kind of made peace with the idea that the Brendan Fraser Mummy trilogy was done. Finished. A beautiful, dust-covered artifact sealed inside a museum case. And then, out of nowhere, the franchise does what any good mummy story does. It refuses to stay buried. The Mummy 4 is not just happening. It's happening sooner than anyone expected. And I genuinely think that detail alone tells us more about this movie than any trailer ever could. Let's talk about it. When a studio pulls a release date earlier, your first instinct might be to panic. Early date shifts in Hollywood have historically been a bad omen. It usually means the film got yanked from a premium slot because someone in a boardroom watched a rough cut and started sweating. But that's not what's happening here. Not even close. Universal moving The Mummy 4 into an earlier window, specifically targeting the spooky season stretch leading into Halloween, is a calculated power play. And if you understand how studios position their tentpole films, you recognize this immediately as a signal of confidence, not panic. Think about what it means logistically. A release date doesn't get moved earlier because a movie is behind schedule. It gets moved earlier because the studio has enough of the film assembled, enough of the tone locked, enough of the vision clarified to feel aggressive about its positioning. Universal wouldn't hand prime October real estate to a project they weren't proud of. October is competitive in a very specific way. It's not the battlefield that summer is, where every weekend feels like a war between 4 different superhero properties. October is curated. It rewards mood. It rewards atmosphere. And the Mummy franchise, at its best, has always been about atmosphere. The original 1999 film was released in May and dominated because it delivered something audiences weren't braced for. It was fun, it was scary in a PG-13 kind of way. It was sweeping and romantic and action-packed all at once. Moving this 4th installment into October is almost like an artistic statement. Universal is saying, we know what this movie is. We know who it's for. And we're putting it exactly where the vibe belongs now. Can we talk about Brendan Fraser for a second? Because I feel like people are still processing how genuinely emotional his comeback has been. The whale. The Oscar. The standing ovation that made half the internet tear up. Brendan Fraser didn't just come back to Hollywood. He came back in a way that felt like a story of resilience that the whole industry needed to witness. And the fact that he's returning to the role of Rick O'Connell isn't just good casting news. It's a full-circle cultural moment that you genuinely cannot manufacture. Rick O'Connell was never just an action hero. He was goofy and fearless and emotionally present in ways that most action leads of the late 90s and early 2000s weren't. He cried. He got flustered. He made you laugh right before the Scarab Beetles showed up. Fraser brought something to that character that felt effortless, but I'd argue is actually extremely specific and impossible to replicate, which is exactly why Tom Cruise's version felt so hollow and disconnected. You can't just swap the lead in a franchise that was built on personality. And then there's Rachel Weisz coming back as Evelyn. This is equally significant, maybe even more so. Evie wasn't a sidekick. She was the intellectual and emotional core of that entire story. She was the reason Rick had anything worth fighting for, and she was the reason audiences actually cared about the mythology. The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor in 2008 replaced Weisz with Maria Bello, and the backlash wasn't just about preference, it was about trust. Audiences felt a fundamental promise had been broken. When both Fraser and Weisz return together, that's not just a reunion. That's Universal acknowledging, explicitly, that the DNA of the original 2 films is what makes this franchise worth reviving. But let's be honest about where things went sideways. Because I think understanding that is crucial to understanding why The Mummy 4 has such an unusual amount of goodwill behind it before a single frame has been released publicly. The 3rd film, Dragon Emperor, wasn't a disaster because it was poorly made on a technical level. It was a disaster because it was emotionally disconnected. The China setting felt arbitrary. The villain lacked menace. And, crucially, the warmth that defined the first 2 movies was just gone. You didn't feel like you were watching people who cared about each other. The 2017 reboot compounded this by swinging in the completely opposite direction. It tried to be dark and mythology-heavy and franchise setup-oriented, and it forgot that the original film worked because it was a movie, not an IP delivery system. Tom Cruise's film was a proof of concept for a cinematic universe that never arrived, and audiences sensed that hollowness immediately. The Mummy was supposed to be scary and fun simultaneously. Instead, it felt like a product. What The Mummy 4 seems to understand, based on everything we know about the production's approach, is that the fix isn't complicated. Bring back the heart. Bring back the people who made you love this world in the first place. Set the story somewhere that feels mythologically rich, not just visually exotic. And, crucially, don't make it the beginning of something. Make it a story. Here's where it gets really interesting from a production standpoint. The choice to go with a PG-13 rating is something worth unpacking, because in the current blockbuster landscape, there's always this pull toward either going hard or for mature credibility, or going soft PG to chase family audiences. PG-13, done right, is actually the hardest category to nail. It forces filmmakers to be creative with horror, with violence, with tension. And the original Mummy was a masterclass in PG-13 horror craft. Those scenes with the scarab beetles were deeply unsettling without ever being gratuitous. The filmmakers approaching this fourth installment reportedly want to honor that balance. They understand that the tone of the original wasn't accidental. It was a result of precise calibration between adventure movie energy and genuine creature feature dread. When a mummy priests had their tongues cut out in the 1999 film, that was horrifying in a way that landed inside a PG-13 framework because the camera was smart about it. The goal for The Mummy 4 seems to be threading that same needle. Be genuinely unsettling, be funny, be romantic, be epic. All at once. In 2025, that's actually a bold vision. The production timeline also suggests this isn't a rush project. The script development has reportedly gone through serious rounds of refinement, which tracks with what we're seeing in terms of the studio's confidence level. Universal isn't throwing this at a wall. They're measuring twice. All right, speculation time, and this is the part one personally find the most exciting. Where does Rick O'Connell's story go in a fourth film, roughly 2 decades after the original trilogy concluded? A few threads feel genuinely compelling. One school of thought, and I think this is the most emotionally satisfying direction, is that the film deals with the legacy question. Rick and Evie are older now. Their son Alex was prominent in the third film. A story that examines what it means to pass the torch of monster fighting to the next generation, while still centering the original couple, could be extraordinary if handled right. It would also mirror Fraser's own real-life narrative of legacy, resilience, and returning to something meaningful after years away. Another fascinating possibility is a deeper dive into the Magi mythology. We barely scratched the surface of the Order of the Magi in the original films. Oded Fehr's Ardith Bey was one of the most beloved supporting characters in the franchise, and bringing him back to expand that mythology feels like a natural evolution. If The Mummy 4 takes the world-building seriously, treats the ancient Egyptian lore with the same reverence that, say, a well-researched historical epic does, it could elevate the entire franchise into something genuinely prestigious. There are also whispers about the Scorpion King mythology being woven back in, which opens up interesting tonal questions. Do you go bigger, more mythological, more cosmic in scale? Or do you actually go smaller, more intimate, more focused on the human relationships inside the monster story? My instinct says the latter is the smarter choice, and I suspect the filmmakers know it too. From a pure box office perspective, the October release window is a gift. Let me explain why. Summer 2025 is already shaping up to be an absolutely brutal marketplace. Sequels stacked on top of sequels, major superhero tentpoles, animated franchises, all competing for the same multiplex screens and the same casual movie-going audience. October is comparatively serene. The audience that shows up in October is also a specific type of moviegoer, someone who wants to be in an experience, someone who's leaning into the season consciously. They're dressed in the spirit of it. They want to be thrilled, unsettled, swept up in something. The Mummy 4 releasing in October is like releasing a beach movie in July. It's conceptually perfect. The franchise has always had horror DNA, and letting that DNA breathe inside a month that celebrates exactly that kind of energy is a marketing advantage that money can't fully replicate. You don't have to convince someone to be in the mood for a Mummy movie in October. The calendar does that work for you. The competitive landscape for that window also appears manageable. There are no obvious monster franchises squaring off directly against it. No films with overlapping audience demographics that would split the fan base in a damaging way. Universal has essentially found a clearing in the release calendar and built a campfire in it. Here's what I keep coming back to, though. Beyond the release date math and the production analysis and the box office projections, beyond all of it, there's something quietly remarkable about this movie existing at all. Brendan Fraser walked through some genuinely dark years. Rachel Weisz has maintained one of the most selective, quality-driven careers in Hollywood. And the Mummy franchise itself spent the better part of a decade being used as a cautionary tale about studio hubris and reboots gone wrong. And yet here we are. October is coming. The bandages are coming off. And something tells me, call it movie intuition, call it franchise pattern recognition, call it whatever you want, something tells me that The Mummy 4 isn't just going to be a good nostalgia play. I think it might actually remind the industry of something it's been struggling to remember lately. That adventure movies with heart, with genuine character love, with monsters that mean something, can still be the movies that people talk about for years. The Mummy always rises. The question now is just how high? Drop your theories in the comments. Do you think this could be better than the original? And if you're sleeping on a Halloween release window as a game changer, I want to hear why. Subscribe if you want a full breakdown when that first trailer drops, because I have a feeling it's going to be something special.